Good afternoon, friends. You are listening to EBC Radio 1170 AM, and I am your host, Alka, and today we are going to be talking to a very, very special guest, and this segment is brought to you and supported by Robert Wood Johnson Barnabas Health and Rutgers CINJ, which is Cancer Institute of New Jersey. I'm very grateful to them for supporting this outreach program, and we will be talking to Dr. Sanjay Goel, who is MD MS, and he is the Director of Phase 1 Investigational Therapeutics at Rutgers Cancer Institute of New Jersey and a professor of medicine at Rutgers Robert Wood Johnson Medical School. He received his medical degree from Christian Medical College, Vellore, India, and then did a residency in internal medicine and fellowship in hematology and medical oncology. He also completed a 2-year program obtaining a Master of Science degree in clinical research from the Albert Einstein College of Medicine. Dr. Goel has an interest in drug development of anti-cancer agents and development of biomarkers of drug response. He has extensive experience in Phase 1 cancer clinical trials and in Phase 2 and 3 trials in gastrointestinal and genitourinary malignancies. His clinical interests lie in cancer immunotherapy and colorectal cancer. His work also includes health outcomes in minority patients and health disparities. Wow, what a great work, Doctor, you have achieved in all this time. And we are such an honor to have you on EBC Radio. Welcome on EBC Radio. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, Alka, and thank you. And a good afternoon to you and all the listeners out there.
Thank you so much for coming. And can you tell us, what is a clinical trial and what are the different types of clinical trials? What are the potential benefits of participating in a clinical trial?
Sure. Thank you for that, Alka. So to put it simply, a clinical trial is a mechanism by which new approaches are tested in the field of medicine. So these are research studies that are performed in people evaluating maybe a medical or a surgical or even a lifestyle intervention. But clinical trials are really the primary way that researchers find out if a new diagnostic tool or treatment, such as a new drug or a new device, or maybe even a new diet or a lifestyle change, is both safe and effective in people. So essentially, clinical trials can be either for diagnostic or for therapeutic purposes. Now, particularly in the field of cancer, I would say there are probably 4 phases of clinical trials. So in a phase 1 trial, which is what I would say I've focused the bulk of my career, but the primary purpose is really to determine the safety of a new intervention. And in what I've been doing, it's really to test the safety of a new drug. But however, it should not be forgotten that therapeutic benefit is always on the minds of both the researchers and the patients. The next phase of a clinical trial is a phase 2, wherein a particular intervention is tested in a smaller group of similar patients, such as testing a drug in patients with breast cancer. And finally, a drug or a device may move into a phase 3 trial, wherein the new drug or intervention is compared to the prevailing standard of care. Now, finally, once a drug receives approval by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, a phase 4 study or a phase 4 trial may be launched. And this is really to determine the safety and efficacy of a new drug in the real world when thousands of patients are being treated.
Wow.
Now, coming to your next question, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Now, coming to your next question about the potential benefits of participating in the clinical trial, I would say a clear benefit to the patient is the opportunity to avail of a novel and a new therapy, which may not be available to them or may not be available for patients many years down the road. And a perfect example would be there are patients that have volunteered for the initial phases of immunotherapy trials, and they entered these trials maybe more than a decade ago. And a lot of them are still doing really well and remain alive and disease-free. And now immunotherapy really became approved maybe 6 or 7 years ago. But these patients were able to avail of the potential benefits way before that. And if they had chosen not to participate in these trials, then they would have lost the potential benefit. I think the second benefit for a patient in participating in a clinical trial is that invariably the care and the oversight provided to the patient is much more extensive, and they are able to avail of excellent care because they really have an entire research team that is watching over them. Mm-hmm. Now, finally, I would say from an altruistic perspective, participating in a clinical trial today could help revolutionize the treatment of tomorrow, and the patients have a chance to just do that. I would dare say that even coming from a phase 1 experience, I've seen a number of patients who had kind of gone through everything possible, and then their patients referred them to me, and a number of them are still alive and doing really well, simply because they chose to participate in a clinical trial.
That's amazing, doctor. And it is a message to our people, listeners, that if anybody who has been, diagnosed with cancer, and if any of these kind of trials are happening, they should participate and see how it can benefit to them.
I agree completely.
So, doctor, now how does cancer impact the South Asian community specifically, and what should this population consider when it comes to participating in clinical trials?
Sure. Thank you, Alka. I think that is a very important point. Mm-hmm. And I think particularly when it comes to the South Asian community, there is a lot that can be done as regards cancer. I think the most important fact is that unlike the rest of the country, cancer is actually the number one cause of death among South Asians, while in the rest of the country it happens to be heart disease. Another important aspect is that among South Asians in the U.S., the commonest cancers are colorectal cancer and lung in both men and women, and then prostate cancer in men, and breast and vaginal cancers in women. Whereas if one looks at South Asia, meaning geographically South Asia and the Indian subcontinent, one of the most common cancers there is actually head and neck cancer and cervical cancer. I think another important factor is that the screening rate among the South Asian community in the country as a whole is actually lower than the national average. And I think as a medical community, we really need to do a better job at both encouraging and ensuring that age-appropriate cancer screening is made available to them. And this can be achieved by targeted education and community screening programs. Similarly, I think there needs to be an active engagement in seeking and promoting clinical trials relevant to the population. And we all know that the South Asian population in this country is steadily gaining ground as a total percentage. And so I think as time moves on, the relevance of our community in enrolling in clinical trials and contributing to data generation with new drugs and new intervention becomes ever more important.
So, doctor, what do you think why these South Asian community is ignorant? I mean, I think most of the South Asian, what I understand, they all have insurance. So still, why do they don't go for the screening and they're not diagnosed early? Such a high number or so many different kind of cancers you have just described what is seen in South Asians.
Yeah, I think one thing is somewhat of a myth that is held among the South Asian community that in general, the rates of cancer among the South Asian community is low. And I think part of it is a misunderstanding that because of the diet, a lot of South Asians are vegetarians and they're kind of protected from cancer. But that is not the case. I think the second is, as a community, we don't really talk about our health issues very openly with our families and friends. And we tend to hide things. I think we consider ourselves pretty stoic and that we can kind of take care of everything with our willpower. And I think that is a gross disservice to our own population.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, I think people should be more open and talk and share the information. So why is diversity and minority representation in clinical trials important?
I think that is a very important question, Alka. So, the U.S. is becoming a more racially diverse country than it has ever been. So, for example, in the latest census, the non-Hispanic whites represent 60% of the total population. However, when it comes to participation in clinical trials, especially cancer clinical trials, the non-white population is less than 15% of all the patients who participate. Now, to truly gauge both the efficacy and the toxicity of a new intervention in a population, the clinical trial should ideally be performed in a population that resembles the general population. And there are differences that may exist between the different races that could alter both the effectiveness and the toxicity profile of a drug. And unless that specific population is adequately tested, we will never really know the answer. For example, a drug may work extremely well in the non-Hispanic whites, but may not really work in a particular South Asian or an East Asian population. And I think what is particularly important is for the South Asian community, because it is especially relevant in New Jersey. As an example, in the entire country, South Asians comprise about 1.5% of the population. But in the state of New Jersey, South Asians comprise about 4.2% of the population. The thing in such states like New Jersey, which have a higher representation of South Asians, the community needs to be particularly encouraged to contribute towards a greater share in clinical trial participation.
I think so, because as you mentioned, 4% of South Asian in New Jersey is a really high number. So friends, we are talking to Dr. Sanjay Goel, MD, MS. He's a director of Phase 1 Investigational and Therapeutics from Rutgers Cancer Institute of New Jersey. So Doctor, now tell me how clinical trial collaboration between Rutgers Cancer Institute and Robert Wood Johnson Barnabas Health provides new treatment options to patients throughout the region.
Yeah, again, I think a very important point. So as you know, I am new to Rutgers. But I think what I've already learned is that the merger between the Rutgers Cancer Institute and the RWJ Barnabas Health System has really brought great opportunities to both systems. I think one is it provides access to novel, cutting-edge clinical trials to patients all over the state of New Jersey. And this is through the NCI-designated Rutgers Cancer Institute of New Jersey. So to briefly explain to our listeners, NCI designation is kind of a term that is given to the best of the cancer centers in the country. It's only granted after a very thorough peer-reviewed process wherein a cancer center submits an application to the National Cancer Institute and it's then reviewed by peers and leaders in the field of cancer. So the stamp of NCI designation immediately elucidates the strong clinical and research strengths of a cancer center. So in the state of New Jersey, only the Rutgers CING has been awarded the seal of approval. And furthermore, this one system approach will allow patients to avail of care wherever it is convenient for them. Similarly, in a few months, with the implementation of a common electronic medical record, it will allow caregivers in one hospital to access the medical records of a patient if she or he were to present at a location that is not their home base. And lastly, I think it will also give investigators with a novel idea and a novel clinical trial to seek the help of collaborators from health system physicians to encourage enrollment into their trials. So I think overall it will really provide for a better and more comprehensive patient experience.
Fantastic, Doctor. So now, friends, for more information, if you want to know about clinical trials at Rutgers Cancer Institute of New Jersey in partnership with Robert Wood Johnson Barnabas Health, you can visit rwjbh.org/beat-cancer. So we all have to fight cancer. So please visit rwjbh.org/beat-cancer. So with that, Doctor, I want you to give one last advice to our listeners about this clinical trials, what you just spoke, what they should do.
I think it's very important that whenever they seek care for the cancer, very important and an easy website is clinicaltrials.gov. So again, it's clinicaltrials.gov. This is a website that is actually maintained by the U.S. government, and it is mandated that every prospective clinical trial that enrolls patients be listed on this. And it lists thousands of trials, and one can search by their disease type, by location, and by possibly even the stage of disease. And if patients find it difficult to navigate through this, they can always reach out to their treating oncologist. And I think one advice I would give them is before they start any kind of treatment, always discuss the option of a clinical trial. and weigh both the risks and the benefits, and then make a decision whether they'd rather go with the trial or go with the standard of care. But I think it is something important for them to seek out for their management.
So friends, you just heard from Dr. Sanjay Goel from Rutgers Cancer Institute of New Jersey, and he is Investigational Therapeutics, and he has done a lot of research and is doing on immunotherapy medicines research he has done. So he is telling about research participation. So you should participate in those things. Actually not research, it is more of the trial, right?
Well, in a way, a trial is part of research, but as I said, there's always a potential for patient benefit.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Doctor, for coming on Airwaves of EBC Radio. And this is such a great topic, and I hope we can have you more often on the radio to educate our listeners more and convince them to participate into these clinical trials.
Thank you, Alka. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much.